Skipping.
of the
It's
ionosphere.
it's a similar phenomena to skipping.
Yeah. So, essentially, I guess what they're saying then is that the Black Knight satellite picked up these transmissions and
bounced them back to us for some reason. Rebroadcast it.
Yeah, rebroadcast. It didn't just echo off the satellite, but it actually absorbed it, recorded it, retransmitted it back down at different intervals.
At a delay, yes.
And a delay. The delay was not consistent, though, if I understand correct.
No, it is not a consistent delay. It can I think it's anywhere from 6 to 30 seconds to sometimes up to a minute or so.
Mm-hmm.
It's really inconsistent. It's really weird.
Yeah, it is a little weird.
We're going to move forward again to 1954.
Okay.
And according to the story, the U.S. government released information that they had detected 2 satellites that were in a polar orbit. First, you need to understand that we, and by we, I mean the human race.
Not us specifically, Team Sideways.
Not Team Sideways.
Yes, not Team Sideways, but the actual human race had not yet developed a capability to put a satellite into orbit. That wouldn't happen until October 4th of 1957 when Sputnik was put into orbit. So we hadn't launched a satellite at all.
I guess we should clarify also that satellite can mean anything that's orbiting, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that it's of...
Yeah, the moon is a satellite.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes,
Right.
anything that is intentionally orbiting the Earth.
So it doesn't necessarily mean it was mechanical or anything like that.
True.
Right.
Very true.
Okay.
The other thing to keep in mind is that it says that there were 2 satellites at the time in a polar orbit. And I want to talk about a polar orbit real quick so that people know what this is, because this is important.
Yeah.
Most satellites are in an equatorial or semi-equatorial orbit. That means that they're going around the equator.
Yeah.
And most people do satellites even today that way because it's easier, because when a rocket is launched, you use the inertia of the Earth to propel it in that direction.
Yeah, not the inertia, but the speed, the rotation.
Rotation is what I was after.
The rotation of the Earth, yeah.
But it helps with it, so it gets it going.
Yeah, that's why most of them are west to east.
Yeah.
There's only a few that are east to west.
Correct.
There are some,
but the thing is going in the opposite direction, or even more so going in a polar orbit, is hard because you've got to negate all of that speed that you picked up on launch and then get something to rotate over each of the poles. So instead of going around the equator, we're rotate at 90 degrees. Now you're going over both the poles.
So instead of going east-west or west-east, they're going north-south or south-north.
Yeah,
correct.
Exactly. And
that's a very good way to put it.
And and what you do for that is you just launch from a more northerly launch point. That also helps a lot. But it's not tremendously unusual. I mean, a lot of survey and spy satellites have polar orbits because that's a great way to cover the entire surface of the planet in a very short amount of time.
That's the upside of the polar orbit is you're circling around the poles while the Earth is circling around underneath you, so you can take images of the whole thing.
Right.
Yeah. So lots of survey satellites and stuff like that use the polar orbits.
But that's perhaps newer.
That's
I mean, obviously, our earliest launches were just west to east.
Yeah, and the first satellite, and I use that with air quotes.
Satellite.
What?
Man-made satellite?
Yes, the first man-made satellite.
Yeah.
Thank you. That we put into a polar orbit of any kind didn't happen until 1960, and this report is from 1954.
Okay.
So there's some strangeness there. The other thing is that, according to these reports, that satellite was transmitting radio signals that could be detected but couldn't be picked up.
The satellites from 1954?
Yes.
Both of them?
Yes.
Okay.
Or at least one of them.
Okay.
Again, this is where the story gets a little fudgy, and I don't know. But signals are being sent. They're being picked up. We don't know what they are. And then the satellites just kind of disappear, or maybe we lost track of them. I'm not positive, but there's no more reporting on it at that time.
Yeah, I'm really not sure what our tracking abilities were back in those days, because, I mean, these days we have radars because obviously we want to track all the satellites that are up there. And
at that time, I don't even know how they picked them up. That's the hard part, is I don't know how these things were discovered, because I can't find it in the lore. Again, I'm going to use that phrase. All of the retellings and the stuff that I've found, and digging through it, I can't find out how it was picked up, just that it was.
Yeah. So it makes you wonder.
Yeah. We're going to skip ahead a couple of years to 1957.
Okay.
There are accounts that the Black Knight satellite was photographed following Sputnik 2 by a guy named Dr. Corrales. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
He's It happened in Venezuela, so I'm assuming that it's a name that's of some Spanish origin, but I'm terrible at pronunciations, as we all know by now. So I'm just going to go with that.
So somehow the BKS managed to swing out of its polar orbit and get behind Sputnik 2? Or
Yeah. Evidently, it was shadowing Sputnik 2.
That's interesting.
Yeah,
intriguing.
and he took this photo of it when he was in Caracas. But again, this is another bit. It's so jumbled. It's so muddled. I can't get good details on this that's good enough to retell. So I'm just going to kind of leave it at that, as it was photographed shadowing Sputnik 2.
And no copies of the photograph exist anywhere, I take it?
I can't find them.
Yeah.
I haven't seen anything. Again, we're going to skip forward in time a couple of years to 1960. At that time, the U.S. and the Russians had put successfully quite a few satellites into orbit. What you got to remember, though, is, of course, now we're in the Cold War, and this freaks the U.S. military out that, oh, my God, there's satellites up there that could be, recording us or taking pictures of us.
Yeah, you got to keep track of those things.
You do, and so they put up a net, a kind of a radar net, like what you were alluding to a little bit earlier, Joe, so that they could track what came across. There was one on the eastern coast and one on the western coast, so they could track the things that came by. On February 11 of 1960, newspapers announced that an object was detected that was of unknown origins, and it was described as a dark, tumbling object that was at it's orbiting 79 degrees off the equator.
So close to a polar orbit.
Yeah, kind of. Not exactly a true polar orbit, as it was described from the 1954 report. But I don't know. But it's also said that it had an eccentric or erratic orbit, and it had an apogee of, and this is where I'm going to need your help here, Joe. So it says the apogee was 1,728 kilometers. What is that going to be in miles?
1,073.
Okay. Yeah. And it had a perigee of 216 kilometers.
What's a perigee?
So what does that? Well, what does that equate to in miles?
134.
Okay.
So perigee is the low point in the orbit. Apogee is the high point in the orbit.
Thank you.
And the easy way that I always think of it is away and apogee both start with an A, which puts perigee closer. Does that make sense?
No.
The A and the P. It's kind of a what's the word I'm looking for? It's a
mnemonic.
Mnemonic. Thank you.
It's not. But
it's not. But it's it's the way I remember it. Is apogee's away. That puts perigee close. It's not the best thing, but that's how I keep it straight in my little head.
Sure.
Yeah, but that was
1960.
1960. Now, this particular orbit, this is what the U.S. military reported, because I thought they reported something with a little bit not quite such an erratic orbit.
That's the difficulty here is that with retellings, it's hard to pin down exactly what was talked about or reported.
I got to say, if this is indeed an alien object that they put in orbit around the planet, they did kind of a crappy job.
Well, the thing, obviously, that I don't like talking about because I don't want to ever think about it, but, the whole, lost cosmonaut thing is, 1959. So, I mean, to have some weird lost space stuff in accidental orbit of the Earth isn't,
It's not unheard of.
It's not unheard of.
It's not at all unheard of.
No. Here's something, I mean, we've been talking about the orbit and stuff being up there, but here's something that's weird about the orbit to me is things that are in a stable orbit have to be 222 miles or more above the Earth.
Okay.
This thing was, what was it was
134
miles, which to me doesn't make sense because that seems like it would come too close gravity and atmosphere would drag it and slow it down and pull it back to Earth. So it's a weird orbit to me.
Yeah, it would take a long time for that orbit to decay, but it would eventually, yeah.
Yeah. It's also said that, and this is talking about the size of the satellite, it's said that the object was calculated to be somewhere between 10 to 15 tons.
How?
I have no idea how that calculation was done.
That is a good question.
But that is miles and miles heavier, much, much heavier than anything we had been able to put into orbit at that time.
But I'm sure a piece of cake for the aliens.
Easy.
Yeah.
I can't get a clear bead on the size of it, and this is the part that really jumps out to me based on that weight. Is I've seen a couple of places say that it was 2 foot by 3 foot.
No.
Which would put it at what? 3, 6, 12 cubic feet?
It'd be a really dense little object.
Yeah. That's over a ton a cubic foot. That's freaking heavy.
I mean, there are some
metals.
Materials that could be like that, but it'd have to be totally solid.
Yeah, I mean, some asteroids are made of heavy metals, but I don't think anything that dense.
And yeah, it would have to be, right? And so then you run into the problem of if it is broadcasting anything, there can't also be contained within a technology to broadcast.
That we know how to make.
Well, fair. That we know how to make.
That we know how to make.
But we know how to make everything, Steve. We're human beings.
Have you seen Joe's basement? He makes everything down there.
I know.
I've got a bunch of little L's down there.
He's got one of these things down there.
But here's the thing about it. If it's only 2 by 3 feet, then how did Dr. What's-His-Name in Caracas, Venezuela manage to snap a picture of it?
Yeah.
Much less see it.
Well, I don't think Sputnik was very big.
Nah, I don't. Yeah, I guess Sputnik wasn't all that big either.
And Sputnik 2 would have been the same design, just the second one shot up into space. But I mean, the thing is that what we're going to find with this story as we go through, the orbit changes, the weight changes.